Welcome to part 6 in the final installment of our webinar series, Sharing Stories and Building Relationships with the Land. This project began clear back in February. It's hard to believe that we're already at the end, but we're very excited today. My name is Peg Vershawn, and I'm the Director of Programs at CURE, Clean Up the River Environment in Montevideo, Minnesota. The Sharing Series stories grew out of a partnership that was produced by our We Are Water West Central Minnesota project this past year. Our shared goal with this series has been to amplify voices of people who are using conservation practices that have important regenerative potential while reducing the impacts of climate change on the land. These practices improve soil health and water quality. They grow deep connections to the land and those who came before them. These are stories from practitioners, people with their boots on the ground and soil underneath their fingernails. Together, these storytellers are from different backgrounds, cultures, and generations. We're at a critical moment where we need to hear perspectives of path builders who are catalyzing change for themselves and their communities. Today, I'm happy to share with you or bring to you Ella Robertson and Eric Wana from Peever, South Dakota. Ella and Eric are role models of the idea of Indigenuity, the hard work, perseverance, entrepreneurial spirit, resilience in working to recover traditional farming methods and practices. With deep connections to the land, we will discuss their current projects, practices, and what they are working to pass along this knowledge to future generations. We have a brief introductory video that was shot by Brian DeVore from Land Stewardship Project. He went out and met with Eric and Ella, and it kind of sets the tone and gives you an idea how beautiful the place is where they live and all of their work there. So we're going to start with that video, and so give me just a moment and we'll do a screen sharing.
Hello, my name is Ella Robertson. I'm a member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate.
Hello, I'm Eric Wana, member of the Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate as well. So we are in the Big Coulee area of Peever, South Dakota. So a little breakdown of what we have going on is
we have a traditional garden where we grow heirloom seeds. One of our most important crop to us is our wamnayaza, which is a traditional corn that we received from a tribal member over in the Granite Falls area from Upper Sioux community. And then also we have our high tunnel, which Eric received through a grant from NRCS EQIP program. So it's kind of a combination of the two, and then we added some tree fabric because we're trying to juggle having a garden and working full-time, so we don't get to spend all day in the garden, where traditionally our people, that's their job, getting food,
gardening from day to day.
Yeah.
So definitely an emphasis on heirloom, traditional types of foods. For instance, older varieties of tomatoes, if at all possible, traditional varieties of what we have here. For instance, ground plums or ground cherries. Something new we added to our garden this year. Mm-hmm. Similar to a tomatillo. We have a variety of different squashes we grow. You can see the apple trees behind us here. Through the years, I have been attempting grafting, trying to make an everything tree. You know, taking different clippings of trees I've had or found across the Sisseton Wahpeton Reservation anyways, and hoping to add it to it.
So we're trying to have an orchard.
Yeah.
So we have these apple trees, we have pear, cherry, We planted 2 peach trees, one took, and then this was actually our first year we hand pollinated our pear tree. And so we actually had pears. And so we were pretty excited about that. We found another pear tree down a couple coulees over. So we gathered some blossoms and we pollinated our tree here, which didn't have a companion tree, and it took. So we were pretty excited about that. That was our first year because I've had that tree for like 14 years and it's never produced any pears.
Yeah. So we do have bees for pollination. Something we've been working on for probably 8, maybe
3 years.
Something like that. It's been longer than that.
We started when I worked in the planning department over at Sisseton Wahpeton Oyate. We went out to Wisconsin to get our first start in honeybees for the tribe. I had no experience. Eric had some experience. And so I think with all things, we just kind of dive right in. If we feel like we're interested in it, we want to do it, then we just dive right in.
Yeah, absolutely. For sure.
And so kind of getting back, or we wanted to talk a little bit about the history of like our people here. And Eric's family has, some generations back, they had a farm with cattle and
so turn of the century 1900s type of deal. Farming was sort of given to us as a means of supporting ourselves. So some families took to it, others didn't. Fortunately, I come from a family that did do well in it.
And it was a number of your families.
Yeah, it was a number of families. So I could name a bunch of random families, but anyways, it stayed in our family and quite a few other families up until the 80s. I would say prior to me would be the last generation where we were actually still into farming and ranching. I'm not sure where the crossover went, where for some odd reason the families just sort of gave up, and I don't know where all that came from or how that came about, but so I'm a generation away from farming now. Slowly over the years with Ella, we've been putting our foot back into it and hoping to get back to that area.
And my experience is different. My family didn't retain our original allotment of land. We didn't farm. We did do some gardening. As a child, I remember gardening, but it was a hardship because we didn't have running water, so we would have to haul water. And so I didn't have that. Like Eric did, I didn't have that same experience. So I had a limited amount of experience, gardening growing up. And it wasn't until probably the last, 5 or 7 years where we became really serious about it. I mean, it wasn't just like we're going to go put some plants in the ground and forget about them and they're all up in weeds and you're like, hey, I got some tomatoes around here somewhere, because that has happened. We were really committed to it. And so then we were looking at using straw to keep the weeds from growing, because it is juggling those schedules and trying to be, how can you be committed, but not, where it's taking so much hours and backbreaking work.
So Ella, welcome you and Eric to the webinar today. During your video clip that we just watched, in the beautiful fall day with the apples on the trees, you talked a little bit about indigenuity, and I'm wondering if you could share with us a little bit more about what that quest for revitalizing your culture is, and a little bit more about indigenuity. It's easy for me to say. I'll let you answer that question, okay?
Well, maybe we'll start with ingenuity or indigenuity. So when it comes to heirloom style, traditional style seeds, truly Native American seeds, passed down heritage. There's a little bit of a different process in starting and growing these seeds. They don't exactly come up and come on the ground as a seed from a packet would. So we've been growing for quite a number of years. Main thing was understanding how to get them to grow. A lot of times we would put a seed in the ground thinking we'd water it and they'd just come right up and provide us with seed stock. Not always the case. A little bit of a learning process or a little bit of a learning curve when it comes to growing.
And I think it's about the cultural end of it and reconnecting with those seeds, with our culture, learning significant steps that and protocols that our people took when they were planting and how they cared for their seeds. The first heirloom seed that we received was a Wamnayaza, a traditional corn from Upper Sioux community. And that seed was passed down generations in a family. And someone was always designated as the caretaker of that seed. And so that they ensured that it was planted each year and you know, they kept that tradition going for the family. So ours is a little different, that having understanding and connecting with the seeds, because our seeds have stories, you know, like that. The corn that we received, you know, when I talked to the gentleman and he told me this whole story about, you know, his mother, his parents, his grandparents, and all the way back, that it has history. And so that's kind of the difference when we talk about indigenuity, is like our perspective and how we see the foods that we grow. And how we're being innovative with it, you know, is the use of, you know, more modern techniques to grow so that it's a little easier for us. This past year, we received a hydroponic system from
Sisseton Wahpeton College.
Yep, Sisseton Wahpeton College. Paula Horn and Orville Looking Horse received a grant, and so they were able to gift a few community members. I was very fortunate to be one of them, Eric and I, to receive that hydroponic system. And this past month, I went over to Minnesota and picked up 2 water barrels to establish our water catchment system. And that was one thing that I talked about when we did the interview, is about ensuring our water source. And, you know, because they're talking now about drought and, you know, things like that, that we want to make sure that we're looking ahead, not just for the needs that are happening right now, but ensuring, you know, their longevity.
Going back to the seeds and the heirloom seeds, another interesting fact that we found was selective growing of the seeds themselves, developing your own heirloom style seed. So in the beginning, all the seeds were pretty much the same. All the families broke off and obtained their own variety or own style of heirloom seed was by selectively growing individual seeds of color.
And so we did that when we received the corn. The Wamnayaza is, in my mind, I'm thinking, well, if there's yellow ones in there, maybe those ones, you know, may have cross-pollinated with, you know, field corn or something like that. So then we picked out all the yellows and we planted just the white, blue, and red. And the year after that, then we picked out just certain ones. So our varieties they're changing.
Yeah.
Like we had a few ears that looked like jewel corn. And so it's pretty exciting, you know, and our kids are learning right along with that, because, you know, my son Paris was like, oh, that's called selective breeding. You know, that's what we're learning about. Yeah. And so it's pretty exciting that, you know, it's not just about learning from books. The kids are actually, you know, hands in the dirt, learning right along with us. And so it's pretty exciting. And since Eric works at the college now, tell them what your job title is.
Okay, so I've been working with the Sisseton Wahpeton College for a little over a year now. I work with the food science and equity programs. I take care of the greenhouses, manage the prairie restoration areas, do a lot of work in the schools with small scale grow systems. So helping to spread the idea of growing in general, but also being able to grow at a very small scale, 4x4 area. We've been mostly hydroponics, aeroponics, aquaculture. So I've been applying for and thankfully getting a number of grants. So I put on a number of seminars with the different schools where I provided grow systems to them. There is a whole lot going on there, which is absolutely wonderful. And thankfully our schools are taking to it. So since the video and since our previous discussion, the whole idea of sustainable environmental friendliness and growing has just took it off in ways that I can't even imagine.
And I think one thing that I'm really excited about for him is that he's been working with the culinary arts program there at the college. So they come over, pick what he's grown in the greenhouse.
Yeah, so the students from the beginning, they come in, they have the menus, of course. So we plant our different seeds. They get to see them in the ground. They get to see them germinate. They get to see them to the flowering stage and actually picking the individual lettuces and tomatoes and cucumber. I have a huge stock in our greenhouse growing. So the students get a hands-on not only cooking, but they also get to grow the product and harvest the product, which is just amazing.
And what was it, 2 weeks or 3 weeks ago, you provided the tribe with how many pounds of lettuce?
Yeah, so since all this has taken off, I've been producing so much vegetables. We've been turning a number of it over to the tribe as well. It was a lot. It was a lot. So yeah, it's just amazing the path that we're on right now and where it's taken us. It is truly amazing.
And it's not it. And I think, like when Peg and I were talking, about, the difference, I think, between the average farmer and what we're doing, a lot of ours is teaching and, because I was just in the school before school ended, they asked me to come up and do a presentation to 3 of the middle school classes about what we're growing, how we harvest traditional foods and medicines, tapping trees. And so I got to talk to the kids about all of that. I like to share a lot of pictures so then they get an idea. And then I prepared tea, our traditional tea for them. And I also provided them a sample of our maple sugar that we made from tapping trees. And so then you're utilizing all of your senses, you're smelling, you're tasting, you're feeling. And well, of course they're hearing me talk, but and they're getting to see all of the things that we're doing. And to me, I think, it's a step towards encouraging the next, person that's going to be carrying on those traditions.
That's truly amazing, all of the new innovative ways that you're integrating growing vegetables for the tribal community and through the tribal college. And I love the fact that you're getting kids excited about growing in a way that they've never been exposed to before, probably. One of the things you talked about is you've talked about foraging. And I'm wondering if you can share a little bit with us. This whole series is about our relationship with the land. And some of the undercurrents of the webinar, talk about climate change, talk about relationships with the land that might be different than what people might be exposed to normally. And so could you talk a little bit about foraging um, and what that is and how it's important to your culture and your community, please?
When it comes to gathering our foods and medicines, climate change is going to have a huge impact. We've seen it somewhat. The seasons are different. When you gather is different, and dependent on how much water we're receiving or how much sunlight we're receiving. Like when we went out to get morels this past year, last week. Because of the lack of rain, we just found one small patch and that was it. And it kind of went really fast. And so what we do is really contingent on the weather and on the seasons. And because things are wild, we don't have any control over their environment, how much water they're getting or not getting, or how much sunlight. And so there is no control. So it's just totally dependent on the environment.
We really depend on the late winter snow. When it actually starts to go away and come into the creek, we really depend on the spring rains. A lot of what we collect are tubers and early spring and
Or spearing.
Well, spearing, fishing as well. That's part of what we do. But as far as foraging, a lot of the plants and a lot of the tubers that we collect depend greatly on our spring rains. So this past spring we were out. We did come across some morels, leeks. Another tuber that is just now coming up is Teepsina. So I was out last week looking at Teepsinas, and so far the crop is looking pretty poor. The tubers themselves haven't developed fully. A lot of them that were left over from last year are extremely woody. They're not coming back the same as they usually would. About this time of year is when we're actually in the field collecting them by the hundreds. And unfortunately, this year it's looking pretty bad.
I did want to touch about the whole spearing. Because of the lack of rain, then I think we probably saw just a few fish, because it's during the time when they spawn, and so they need that a certain level of water to be able to make it from the lake up the creek. They need that certain temperature, and all of these little elements have to all be aligned for it to happen. And I was remembering when we were kids, and you would go into the creek and they would just be hitting your legs, and there was so many of them. The water would just be black with fish. And now
our spearing season lasted maybe a week, probably a little less. And the only reason we had a good spearing season for the 1 week was prior to it we had 2 days of hard rain. And after that was nothing. Our snow melted away way back in the middle of probably beginning of March, which the snow melt has also it comes into play when it's spearing season.
We saw I think we got 5 fish, where normally you get your limit. Everybody's getting their limit, and this year that didn't happen. And so that's a whole part of it's not just about the plants and what we're gathering, but it's also about the animals and how climate is affecting those animals. And so when we're talking about even water and how that's impacting us, like one of the medicines that we're known for, it grows in marshy areas. So when you have farmers that are utilizing chemical in their fields, and there's runoff and it's going into these creek areas, and you're digging this medicine to heal yourself, well, in the meantime, you're ingesting whatever chemicals that
it is a tuber. It's a grip.
Yep, and it absorbs what's in the environment. And so that's kind of a little bit scary thinking about that, because you're not getting it tested. You're thinking it's out there in nature, that it's going to be pure, it's going to help you. And so that's one thing that
That is a great idea.
to test it.
Whoever's watching this, someone's gonna do it.
And so, I mean, it's important to think about that, those things. And, we haven't really, I think, worked hand in hand with the Tribal Historic Preservation Office, where they would be the excellent candidate for protecting those resources. But we're not there yet. There hasn't been any regulations passed that are really protecting the sources that we have. And, like the place where we go is on non-Indian land, and that farmer knows that that the people go there to gather, and he's agreeable to it. And so that's something too, is having that relationship within our community with non-Indian members, and them having an understanding and appreciation for the culture and what we're doing, that we're not harming the land in any way when we're going out to harvest. And but just being straightforward and honest, and asking permission. And we reside on roughly 113,000 acres. That's how large the reservation is. And it's a mixture of fee land, trust land, tribal land. And, so when we go out to harvest, we have to understand, because the land is checkerboarded. We could be on our land and go right to the next pasture, and it could be state or privately owned. So really having an understanding of your environment, who owns what pieces of land. So that's why I'm always very thankful that we actually get a mail out that has a plat book that has
Individual land ownership.
Yeah, each of the townships and all of that. And so you have to create that relationship, not only within, your community, non-Indian members, but with the officials at the tribe. Can we go on, such and such a land? I've taken a class, or a group of ladies out, and we contacted our tribal realty department, and can you identify an area of land where we can go dig tipsina? And those are our wild turnips, and which is about this time of year that we harvest. And so they did. Oh, I know of the perfect place. And so it's them too, even having an understanding of what the turnip is and the type of environment that it grows. You're not just going to go out, right out here. It has a specific type of environment that it likes to grow.
Like our medicine, same thing, specific type of environment. For our sick day, unfortunately for us, a lot of it grows off of the tribal lands. So a lot of it is under the stewardship of the non-native people that live on the tribal reservation.
Yeah.
So and they do understand. And fortunately for us, they attempt, and they do care very good care. So yeah, it's not only the Native American community that is aware, but also the non-native community are very aware as well, fortunately for us. Which is great.
You talked a little bit about Tribal Historic Preservation Office, or the TIPO office. So one of the things I would just like to share with our participants today is, the majority of us reside in ceded territory that's in the Minnesota River Valley. And one of the things that we can do to support our Native neighbors is, if you own land, you could call the Tribal Historic Preservation Office. You could call the one in Sisseton. You could call the one at Upper Sioux or Lower Sioux. Anywhere in Minnesota, if you're near a tribe or tribal community, they all have a TIPO office, and you could invite them out to your property and extend an invitation. And if they're able and have time, they will come out and do a walkthrough with you, and they might be able to even share some things that you might not have known about the land that they might have information on. But then they could actually see what's on the property. They could see what your land management practices are. And then they could then, when someone like Ella calls and says, I'm looking for wild plum trees, or I'm looking for Timpsona, or elderberries, or Juneberries, or whatever they're looking for, right? Then they would know that you're a person that is an ally that's willing to work with them to come and responsibly and sustainably harvest what is needed for their traditional medicines, which is so important to their culture and keeping their traditions alive. So I would encourage you, if you are a landowner, to consider that. And if you need help with that, you can call the Cure office or the Land Stewardship office, and we can help walk you through that process. But I think that that's really super important to developing relationships with those around us and learning too, learning from the experience. So throughout today, we've talked a lot about what you've been growing, Eric and Ella, either what you've been foraging or what you've been growing, either in your high tunnel or through what you're doing at the Sisseton Wahpeton College. Can you talk a little bit more holistically about the process? Because I think uh, when we interviewed you and we watched some of those initial videos, you shared with us your struggles to learn the traditional ways of processing and putting up some of the things that you harvest. And what you're doing now through this process for the next generation, if you'd be willing to talk a little bit about that.
It has definitely been a learning experience. So a lot of what we do and how we prepare our foods and keep our foods is actually drying and curing our foods. So where we went from air drying to purchasing dehydrators to making hot rooms, it has definitely been
the meat grinder.
Yeah, meat grinders and corn grinders. Next
A
up,
coffee grinder we did, which serves also as like a choke cherry grinder and a maple sugar grinder, so it has multi-purposes.
The beginning of all this, of course, is studies, reading, understanding, finding information wherever and however we can possibly get it. I think like the choke cherries and the Timpsonas, the Juneberries, those practices have been passed on.
Those are ones that we grew up with.
Yeah, those are something we grew
I
up
think
with.
like one of the newer ones was probably the Wamnayasa. Because I had those seeds for a few years and I didn't want to plant them until I understood how to process it, because it's different from sweet corn. When we plant sweet corn and we dry it to make waskuya, you just plant it just like regular corn. And then when it's ripe, you pick it. And I already knew that process. Eric knows that process because we grew up taking it off the cob and drying it. But the Wamnayaza, it's a flint corn. It's harder, and it was different. And I didn't know how to do it. And sadly, I didn't even think to ask my uncle, who they grew up doing that, and he shared stories about, when he was little, having to walk, quarter mile down to the creek to go get water for their whole process. And so, I hung on to those seeds until I went to a little workshop at the college where they showed us how to prepare the Wamnayaza and make it into bashdayapi, which that's the Dakota word for the hominy corn that it becomes once it's cooked and it pops open. And then I'm like, oh my gosh, came home. I'm like, Eric, we got to plant the corn. I know how to do it now. And so there we were, 6 o'clock at night. We're planting corn, and it was kind of late. And I was totally surprised with it. Took off and they tell you knee high by 4th of July, and it wasn't quite there, and so we were a little bit worried, but it still produced, and then we were able to keep seeds and to do that process. We've showed some family members, and so that's a whole part of it, is sharing.
So I think we're 3 years into it now. This will be our 4th year.
Yep, this is our 4th year.
So along with that, we've also been working with fishes, smoking, different drying techniques, curing meats. So of course we do the traditional style of drying or jerking it, but curing whole hams or curing whole legs is another thing coming up we're definitely wanting to get into. Other than that,
and I'll say for us, out of all of the foods that we've produced, our Wamnayaza has been the most profitable. That's the one that's kept our boat afloat, and because there's probably 3-4 people within our whole community that grow that type of corn, and a lot of times when people grow it, it's just enough to just feed themselves, but we've grown enough.
And the other families, same as us, they're just years into it. So it's really the beginning of something, what ourselves and the other 3 families are doing, and understanding it. So it's times are changing. We're getting back to our ways.
It's exciting because it's that whole reconnection. It's like a light bulb going off, like something that got unplugged for a little while, and then you're plugging it back in, and it's just like it comes to life. That's how we feel about what we're doing, is because it's reconnecting with those things. This corn, this belongs to the Dakota people, and so being a part of that, growing it and feeding it and being able to share it with others really means a lot. Because then Eric did get to share it with the culinary arts students.
So in this past year, I grew a flint style white corn from the nominees actually in my greenhouse, which is just amazing. Because who knows if it was possible.
It's up to the ceiling.
Yeah, it's up to the ceiling. Oh my god.
It's like maybe next time you grow it more over here where it has space to grow, because it is so tall.
So the idea behind the college is greenhouses is an edible. You walk into the greenhouse out there, anything you've come across, anything you find, of course, is edible, which is just absolutely wonderful. I mean, eating healthy on the daily for reals. Yes. But it's good.
It is amazing to listen to the stories, and I think that's what's really unique in some ways to your session today, is there's stories behind all of the different collections of foods and native plants and medicines, and there's stories about how to process it. There's stories about how they integrate with the community. I just want to say to our participants that have joined us today, thank you for joining us. And if you want to go into the chat, if you have some questions for Ella and Eric, we've got a few more questions to ask them, but there'll be a few minutes at the end. And since we started just a little bit late, we're going to run just a little bit past 1 o'clock if there's questions and people would like to ask and know more. I guess one of the things that it also is very inspiring to me working with you on this project is your attitude and your optimism. I think that it would be easy for anyone to throw their hands up and say, this is a lot of work, or, you talk about the inability to have control over Mother Nature. I guess all people who farm and work with the land kind of have an element of that, where they just have to trust that it's going to be what it is, and you can only do so much. But it seems like that's an added extra burden in some cases, because your culture depends on the food. Like even talking about your corn soup, that has a cultural significance that The soup is served at funerals, it's served at community gatherings. It's an important part of other parts of your culture that it wouldn't necessarily be for someone who's not Indigenous. Um, I'm wondering, as you think about, you've talked a little bit about some of the things you're ventured into. You kind of talked or referred to like a list of things that you are working on or you want to work on. Can you talk a little bit about what's on the horizon for you? I know, Eric, you started at the tribal college and that kind of opened up some new doors for you, but are there different things, like I know, Ella, we were doing bees earlier today. So maybe you could talk a little bit about that and what you're doing with that.
So we did get one hive from Manly this past year. So our bees for the past so the bees for the past 3 years for us have been failing. Where in the beginning, when we started keeping bees, we would have 4 or 5 hives, and we managed to keep them over the winter for 3 years. I think what variety was it?
Italian.
I think it was the Italians that did the best for us. But the past 3 years, we've started out with 3 hives, and we cannot keep them over the winter for some odd reason.
Well, that in a combination of their swarming. Mm-hmm. And so we were out this spring, like, we tied a string. Yeah, we caught bees and we glued a string on them thinking, well, we're going to chase this down and find our bees, because we ordered Saskatraz last year, which is a new breed of bees, which is supposed to be mite resistant and more hardy, made for the northern climates, like what we have. And they're bigger. They're a bigger bee. So anyway, we're getting the high tunnel ready, and I could hear the bees out there. So I peek out, and they're on the dandelions. And so I'm like, I'm gonna catch this bee and I'm gonna glue this string to it.
So, my grandpa told me a story a long time ago. So when the Europeans, everybody started coming over, how they would catch the wild hives were actually tying pieces of string to the bees, and a whole group or the community chase these bees down and follow them back to their destination, because they say a bee will harvest up to 1 mile or 2 miles from its hive. So of course,
we tried it.
We tried it this year for the first time. Oh my God, we needed more people.
Fast.
Yeah, they're so fast.
But we know that they survived and they're here somewhere.
Yeah, so one interesting thing about it is I identified 3 different varieties of our bees. So we had the Russian bee out there, we had the Italian bee out there, and we had the Carniola. So our bees didn't die off. They didn't, have a huge fail through the winter.
Or some did, but
some may have, but they swarmed out. So we have wild colonies now in our area. And obviously they are our bees, because I did identify them. As far as I know, we're the only ones in our area that have Russians.
Or the Saskatraz.
Yeah.
So anyway,
that's a pretty amazing story. So we actually tied strings to, I think, 4 different bees. One took off to the south of us, one went to the east of us, but
so they didn't go in the same pattern. So that was kind of crazy.
Oh my gosh.
So that's it, and
trial and error. Fun with it. Always try to have fun with what you're doing. I mean, because if you can't enjoy it, if it doesn't bring pleasure to you, what's the use of doing it?
Yeah.
And it's sort of, this goes on to everything that we do. Everything that we do brings a certain amount of pleasure and enjoyment to our lives.
So one thing we talked about doing with our honey is, because in South Dakota, the CBD and all of that is, we have a neighbor that will be growing hemp, and we also had another friend down south is about looking into CBD infused honey. It's just trying to, you have to be innovative and
develop the product.
Yeah, because at this point the only thing that I use is I have arthritis, then I'll use the CBD ointment, topical ointment, and but there's, other people with chronic illnesses, they're looking at those things, and especially with when COVID hit, people were wanting, all these traditional medicines, and you harvest enough for yourself and a family. You can share some, but there's not, you're not harvesting for your whole tribe. So
we don't plan on harvesting for huge numbers.
Yeah, it's just because you're being conservative. You're wanting to ensure that there's going to be more there for the next year, and that's
another reason to teach.
Yeah,
we can help the other families to understand, help them to know where to go and gather, how to prepare, how to save their harvest for the following year.
And so one way that we were innovative last year, which was kind of crazy, is we had a food stand at the powwow, at our 4th of July powwow. And so we had the idea of we're going to sell, not last year, year before, 2019, we're going to sell our traditional tea. Let's make spritzers. And so we used our traditional tea, and then we had different flavors. We had lavender, hibiscus, and so it was over ice, and then we added ginger ale. But it's a way of creating something that's more appealing, because even with our own people, a lot of them don't like buffalo meat, or they don't like wild meat because they didn't grow up eating it. But the same with our tea, it's just tea. So we had to find a way to attract it, to make it attractive to them. And wow, that we sold a lot of it. And you think about the health benefits of our tea is even more, because I actually did have a student that they did some scientific, their research project was the antioxidant level. They compared our traditional tea and Lipton. And I think Tetley was the other one. And so they measured it, and our tea was, about 30% more antioxidant level in it than these other teas. And so you think about what antioxidants do for your body. And so, and I thought, God, that's kind of crazy, because, that was one thing that they told us once COVID came, is to drink your teas. That's what we were told.
So we have a variety of teas that we collect, but the main variety is the one we're talking about now, would be the plant.
Mm-hmm. And that grows wild, and that's something that we harvest wild. We did have a neighbor that tried to grow a plot down here, a test plot, when he was working with NRCS, and they bought plugs, and it just wouldn't take. They planted probably about maybe a quarter of an acre, maybe a little bit less than that, but it just sparsely took. And I said, but it's not used of a plowed environment. It grows in this compact soil, fighting for life with all these other prairie plants, and it thrives in that type. And
lead plant is probably one of the most important plants we have as far as prairie goes. I mean, the root systems on them go out to 12 feet in comparison to other wild plants. Lead plant is truly good. It's an amazing plant.
Lead plant is also a nitrogen fixer, right? So it gives back to the soil. It doesn't just take from the soil, it gives back to the soil, which I think is an important lesson that we learn a lot from our native plants, is that there's a reciprocity or a mutual benefit of that. Susan is asking us, she's wondering what things you're growing in hydroponics. You mentioned that you're growing them indoors. She was wondering if it was indoor or outdoor, but I believe you said it was indoor. And could you give her an idea of what you're growing with your hydroponics? And then we've got a couple more questions after that.
Okay, so currently I use 5 different types of hydroponic systems, all pretty much display. I use NTF channel. I use
tell what an NTF channel is.
So I use NTF channel. I use a Dutch bucket. I use a Beetle bucket system. I use grow towers. Let's see what else. The grow towers. Actually, so experimenting with them for the past year, I've grown just about everything out of them. I do lettuces. I'm up to 9 different varieties of lettuce. I do a Clearwater, I do a Green Star, I do a Romaine, I do a Ruby Sky, which is my favorite. We do a Mizuno, an Asian variety, a couple different Asian varieties of lettuce. Of course, keeping away from the head lettuce is focusing more on the leaf type of lettuces, so it becomes more sustainable. So you're not harvesting the whole head at one time. You're going through and selectively clipping your leaves. I mean, so again, I provide all of this to our food science department. So they come up and they take what they need. I do grow different varieties of peppers. I do mild jalapeno, hot jalapeno. I do banana peppers. Bell peppers, yep. Some of them are specific to greenhouse growing. They're Edox hybrids. In my beto buckets, I do different varieties of tomatoes. So I do independent and I do dependent varieties of tomatoes. So bushing and growing. So let's see here. As far as the tomatoes go, I do an Amish paste. I do Brandywine, Cherokee Purple. One of my new favorites, striped German. Oh, I love the striped German. Excellent sandwich tomato. Do a varieties of Sweet 100. I do the Rutgers, of course, heirloom, but another sandwich variety of tomato. I could just go on and on with them. But so I do about 10 different varieties of tomatoes in my Dutch buckets.
And so he brought home, or we made a Dutch bucket system, a homemade one here. We haven't set it up yet.
Yeah.
And we haven't set up our grow tower yet because though like the hydroponic system that can be brought indoors, where the planting that goes outside, that's seasonal, that's like time sensitive. And so and plus in the hydroponic systems, it's going to be fast growing stuff like the lettuces and microgreens that we're going to be doing in there. So I
do a lot of microgreens. Experimenting with them pretty heavy. Beets and potatoes. No, I have not done any potatoes. As far as beets, I haven't done any beets either. Actually really haven't put any thought into it, but I will. I will definitely, try it. I'm not sure what type of grow system would be best for it, but I'll work on it. And if we ever do this again, I'll have some information for you.
Katie asks, is there a recipe book or a place that they can try traditional teas?
Not that I'm aware of, but that's a good idea.
It's so that's the other thing too, is that there's not like when you're given a tea, it's like you get a bag and it says you have one tea bag, steep for 5 minutes. Our traditional tea isn't like that because it's just loose leaf. And so that's one thing that we were working on is I purchased tea bags and the some other bags, but to start measuring things out. So then when we gift it to people, then it's like 1 teaspoon to 2 cups of water or 4 cups of water. And you boil your water first and then you add your leaves and let it simmer and to however strong that you want it. And it's really simple. I think it's just if you have any experience with loose leaf tea, it's real simple, but it's always the ones that only use tea bags that have a little more difficulty. And I don't really mix and match with my teas, but my cousin Charlie does. She's taking a few. I think we do for medicinal purposes, but yeah. But as we picked all the stuff that we wanted to make blends, but we just haven't gotten around to making them. But the Google machine has a lot of great ideas.
The Google machine.
Yeah.
Understanding research behind it.
Yeah. I would caution the Google machine just a little bit when working with native plants. I would try to find someone in your local community that can help you, just because it's really easy to get the wrong thing and inadvertently perhaps give you a result you're not ready for.
Yeah, identification of the product is a must. Very, very important.
Yep.
Yeah.
So Troy is asking if you could go back in time and give someone some advice, what would they want to share that would help them reclaim their work?
I think reaching out to more elders, because they're really the source of knowledge when it comes to, when it comes to our traditional, even our traditional foods. Because like I said earlier, like, man, my uncle knew, and that's my aunt's husband, that they've been growing this corn for generations. And I didn't even know that. He would come over and visit. He'd go into the high tunnel, come and pick tomatoes and stuff, and he would just say, oh, you got corn, how many corn growing? That's good. And so then to find out that they have this old corn that has been passed down for generations, and I wouldn't have had to go to Granite to get it from another tribe, our sister tribe, that my uncle had it all this time right here. And and Eric's family as well, like some of the knowledge that they have, that I think now we're getting older now, so
I wish I would have paid attention more to my grandparents. I mean, so I grew up around my grandparents, my grandpa, my grandma, and my uncles in particular. And they were foragers. They did the yearly routine of the hunting and the fishing and the drying of the meats. Now, so I'm 45, and a lot of them are gone now. And it is a regret not to have paid more attention as a young person.
And I think when we went out last fall and this year, he was remembering going out with his kushi, and geez, I wish, but then when you're young too, sometimes you don't remember either.
Playing in the woods, get poison ideas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he was very fortunate in that, where I was on the other end of the spectrum. I was the one that was always asking questions because I wanted to know, and we learned a lot of things by trial and error. Like, I told him, I was like, the first time that I found leeks, I think I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and I was the oldest of my siblings. And so we're running around in the trees, and we dug one up because we're like, what is this? And so we dug it up, and we went running up to the house. Mom, look at, what is this? It looks like an onion, and it smells like an onion. What is it? And she's looking at it, and it has a broad leaf, not like a traditional onion with the hollow leaf. And so she's checking it out, smells it, looks at it, and she's just like, well, it looks like an onion, it smells. And she's like, I don't know what that is. Throw it away.
Discovering ginger.
Yeah. And so here we were discovering stuff, out on our own. So that's why I said, like, Eric's on the other end of the spectrum, where he had grandparents that were doing all those things, and we had selected things that we did, our family did, like mushrooms, wild mushrooms. That was big. Milkweed, gathering those things, but the medicines not so much. And
I think about those days sometimes, and how fortunate we are to be alive right now. I mean, trial and errors, random plants and whatnot. Oh my God, I do remember at times going to bed feeling pretty sick. The trial and error part is, I think it's just something that is in your blood. You grew up with. It's from the very beginning. You just wanted to know and understand. It's a connection with nature. It's a connection with Earth that is just we have. It's in us. It is.
Well, Eric, on that note, I just want to thank you both. I think today's session was amazing, and I want to thank everybody for hanging in with us. We've had some sound issues and technical issues, but that really didn't take away at all from all of the wonderful stories that were shared today. So I just truly want to thank you for being able to be with us today. I know that it was a challenge for you guys, and we just really appreciate that. And I also want to thank our partners in this work. So, like I mentioned before, this grew out of a series of work that we did with our We Are Water partnership through the Humanities Center and the University of Minnesota Morris. So I want to thank Troy Goodnow at the Office of Sustainability there on the Morris campus, Judy Johnston from the Stevens County Soil and Water Conservation District, Brian DeVore and Robin Moore from Land Stewardship Project. Brian went out and videoed all of our webinar participants out in the field so that you could get an idea of where they were coming from. And I think it really did make a huge difference in making this series a little bit richer because you could actually see folks out in their environment. I also want to thank the Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, University of Minnesota Extensions Program for partial funding for this webinar series. I want to thank everybody for joining us today and being with us. This isn't the end, though. I really want to reiterate that these webinars will be, they've all been edited thus far, and they're up on our YouTube channel, and you can use them at any time for any purpose related to this work. And they'll be there to share with people if you want to share with them. One of our ultimate goals was to develop and lift up new voices that are doing this sustainable farming, regenerative farming work in this part of the state. And I just can't say enough for all the people that were willing to let us come into their world and take a snapshot of what they're doing and be able to lift up and amplify that work. It's important because as we know, the impact of climate change and the world around us is really requiring us to be nimble and adjust and to do the work that we need to do to adapt to be able to continue this work. So I want to thank everybody again and look forward to seeing you all join us on another project. So enjoy the rest of your day and thank you for sticking with us. Bye-bye.